Pay attention to this footage. This is courtroom evidence photo exhibit 47B, captured by Cedar Falls Police Department during the trial. Look closely at what you're seeing. That's not a mannequin. That's a human being, transformed into something that still haunts everyone who worked this case. The face, painted with those precise crimson lines forming a perfect grid pattern. The dead, hollow stare. This photo was taken as evidence after police found the killer's third victim, and what you're looking at is exactly how she was displayed. Standing upright, positioned like a store dummy, and here's what made detectives' blood run cold. When they found her, she'd been dead for 3 days, but the killer had been back to the scene, twice, to adjust her pose. You know that feeling when you walk past a storefront window at night and catch a glimpse of a mannequin, and for just a split second, your brain thinks it's a real person? For the residents of Cedar Falls, Wisconsin, that instinctive unease became something much darker in the spring of 2017. Cedar Falls was one of those picture-perfect Midwestern towns where people still left their doors unlocked. Population around 42,000. The kind of place where the biggest crime story in recent memory was someone stealing garden gnomes from front yards. Main Street had that classic small-town America charm. Locally owned boutiques, a historic movie theater, coffee shops where everyone knew your name. It was the kind of town where people moved to raise families, to escape the chaos of bigger cities. Rebecca Chen was living that dream. At 29 years old, she managed Nouveau Trends, a upscale women's boutique right in the heart of Main Street's shopping district. Rebecca had moved to Cedar Falls 3 years earlier from Minneapolis, looking for exactly what the town offered: community, safety, a slower pace of life. She was one of those people who lit up every room she entered. Her younger sister Maria would later describe her as someone who made friends with everyone. Even the mailman knew her coffee order. Rebecca lived alone in a small apartment above a bakery, just 2 blocks from the boutique. Every morning she'd walk to work, usually stopping at Greta's coffee house on the corner. The owner, Greta Morrison, remembered Rebecca as a regular who always ordered the same thing: medium vanilla latte, extra foam. She was sunshine, Greta would tell police later. Every single morning, no matter what kind of day I was having, Rebecca made it better. But something else was happening in Cedar Falls that spring. Something that seemed strange but harmless at first. Something that wouldn't connect to Rebecca until it was too late. It started in early April, a Tuesday morning specifically. The manager of Darcy's department store arrived to open up and immediately noticed something off. The store's main display window looked wrong. Bare. Empty. The 3 mannequins that had been showcasing spring dresses were gone. Just gone. The manager, Thomas Brighton, thought maybe corporate had sent someone to switch out the display. But no work order existed. Security footage showed something bizarre. At 3:47 a.m., a figure in dark clothing and a hood had approached the window from inside the store. Somehow they'd been inside. They'd carefully, methodically removed each mannequin, taking nearly 20 minutes to dismantle the display. Then they'd left through the back loading dock, mannequins and all. Police filed it as theft. Weird theft, sure, but theft nonetheless. Mannequins weren't cheap. Each one cost around $800, so it wasn't nothing. But it also wasn't exactly a priority crime. 3 days later, those mannequins turned up, and that's when things got weird. A jogger found the first one in Riverside Park, propped up against a tree. But it wasn't just abandoned there. Someone had worked on it. The face had been painted, bright crimson lines carefully applied, forming a precise grid pattern across the features. Horizontal and vertical lines dividing the face into perfect squares. The eyes, the nose, the mouth, all segmented by this geometric design. It was unsettling to look at. Artistic, almost, but deeply disturbing. The second mannequin appeared the next morning in the parking lot of Cedar Falls High School. Same deal. Same grid pattern painted on the face. Same careful positioning, standing upright, as if waiting for something. The third one showed up at a bus stop on Highway 52. A commuter almost had a heart attack when her headlights swept across it at 6:30 a.m. in the pre-dawn darkness. Local news picked up the story. Mannequin Bandit Strikes Cedar Falls read the headline in the Cedar Falls Tribune. The police chief, Daniel Kowalski, told reporters they were investigating, but honestly, everyone treated it like a prank. Some art student making a statement, some bored teenagers with too much time on their hands. Strange, yes. Criminal? Barely. But then it happened again and again. Throughout April and May, 6 more mannequins disappeared from various stores around Cedar Falls. Each time, the thief somehow gained access to closed businesses. No forced entry, no alarms triggered, like a ghost passing through walls. And each time, the mannequins would reappear days later in public spaces, faces transformed by that same crimson grid pattern. The local Facebook groups had a field day with it. Some people thought it was clever guerrilla art. Others found it creepy. A few store owners were legitimately angry. These weren't cheap props, and even when recovered, they were now vandalized and unusable. The police increased patrols, but the thief was careful, always operating in the dead of night, always avoiding cameras. Here's what nobody knew. Someone was practicing. Rebecca Chen had a routine, and like most people living alone in small towns, that routine was predictable. She opened Nouveau Trends at 10 a.m. sharp every day except Sundays. She took her lunch break at 1 p.m., usually walking to the sandwich shop 2 doors down. She closed at 7 p.m. during the week, 8 p.m. on Saturdays. Anyone watching her, and someone was, could set their clock by Rebecca's movements. The boutique itself was a beautiful space. High ceilings, exposed brick walls painted white, hardwood floors that creaked in certain spots. Rebecca had decorated it herself, with vintage mirrors and elegant display tables. There were 4 mannequins in the store, 2 in the front window, 2 inside near the dressing rooms. Rebecca dressed them every Monday, creating new outfits to showcase the latest inventory. She cared about those mannequins. Sounds silly maybe, but she'd given them names: Sophia, Elena, Claire, and Marie. Her assistant Julie thought it was charming. Rebecca treated everything with care, Julie would tell investigators later. Even the mannequins weren't just props to her. She'd adjust their poses, make sure they looked dignified. That was just who she was. Rebecca closed up Nouveau Trends at 7 p.m. on the evening of June 8, 2017. It was a Thursday, and she'd stayed late to process a shipment that had arrived that afternoon. Security footage from the boutique's external camera shows her locking the front door, testing the handle twice, her usual routine, then walking north toward her apartment. She was wearing a blue cardigan over a white blouse, dark jeans, and her favorite brown leather boots. Her purse was slung over her right shoulder. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired but content, the way someone looks at the end of a productive workday. She never made it home. The walk from Nouveau Trends to Rebecca's apartment should have taken 5 minutes. 6 if she stopped at the corner market like she sometimes did to grab milk or yogurt for breakfast. The route was simple: north on Main Street for 2 blocks, then a left turn onto Birch Avenue. Her apartment was above Sullivan's Bakery, entrance around the side. But that route had a blind spot. The street cameras on that section of Main Street had been broken since March, a budget issue the city council kept putting off fixing. Between the boutique and the corner of Birch Avenue, there was a 2-minute stretch where no cameras covered the sidewalk, and someone knew that. The next morning, when Rebecca didn't show up to open the store at 10 a.m., her assistant manager, Julie Brennan, got worried. Rebecca was never late, ever. Julie had worked with Rebecca for 2 years, and in that entire time, Rebecca had never once failed to communicate if something came up. She was obsessively reliable. Julie called Rebecca's phone at 10:05 a.m. straight to voicemail. She called again at 10:15. Same thing. By 10:30, Julie's worry had shifted into genuine fear. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Julie called Rebecca's emergency contact, her sister Maria in Minneapolis. Maria answered on the second ring. When Julie explained that Rebecca hadn't shown up and wasn't answering her phone, there was a long pause. Then Maria said, "I'm calling the police. Something's not right." Maria tried not to panic. Maybe Rebecca was sick. Maybe her phone died and she was sleeping through her alarm. But Maria knew her sister. Rebecca would crawl to work with the flu before she'd just not show up, and she always had her phone charged. Maria called the Cedar Falls Police Department and filed a missing person report. The dispatcher tried to be reassuring. Adults have the right to go where they want. Maybe she'd gone out of town unexpectedly. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. But Maria was insistent. "You don't understand. My sister would never do this. Never. Something's happened to her." Detective Sarah Odom caught the case. 38 years old, 15 years with the department, Sarah had a reputation for being thorough. In her career with Cedar Falls PD, she'd handled exactly 2 missing persons cases, and both had resolved within 24 hours. One was a teenage runaway who'd gone to stay with a boyfriend in Madison, the other an elderly man with dementia who'd wandered off and was found at a gas station 10 miles away, confused but unharmed. Cedar Falls wasn't the kind of place where people vanished, but Sarah took it seriously from the start. Something about Maria's voice on the phone, the absolute certainty that this wasn't normal, convinced her this wasn't a routine case. Sarah went to Rebecca's apartment. The landlord, Mrs. Patricia Sullivan, who also owned the bakery downstairs, let her in. "Rebecca's such a wonderful tenant," Patricia said as she unlocked the door. "Always pays rent early, keeps the place spotless. I can't imagine where she'd be." The apartment was small but cozy. 1 bedroom, a combined living room and kitchen area, a tiny bathroom. Everything was neat, almost too neat. The bed was made with military precision, corners tucked tight. The dishes in the sink were washed and drying in the rack. Rebecca's coffee maker sat on the counter, cleaned and ready for the next morning that never came. Sarah walked through methodically, taking notes. Rebecca's phone charger sat on the nightstand, but no phone. Her laptop was on the small desk in the corner, closed. Her car keys hung on the hook by the door because Rebecca walked to work. Her coat closet held an organized row of jackets and sweaters. A pair of sneakers sat by the door, neatly placed. What was missing? Her purse, her phone, and the clothes she'd been wearing. Julie had described the blue cardigan, white blouse, and brown boots. None of those items were in the apartment. Sarah checked the bathroom. Rebecca's toothbrush was in the holder. Her contact lens case sat on the sink, empty. Rebecca wore her contacts during the day, glasses at night. The contacts weren't in the case, which meant she'd been wearing them when she disappeared. Small details, but they mattered. Rebecca had left work intending to come home. She hadn't planned to go anywhere else. She hadn't packed. She'd expected to walk through this door, take out her contacts, change into comfortable clothes, make dinner, all the normal evening routine things that never happened. Sarah pulled Rebecca's laptop and took it as evidence. She interviewed Mrs. Sullivan, who lived in the apartment below. Rebecca's. Had she heard anything unusual last night? No. Rebecca usually came home around 7:15 p.m., and Mrs. Sullivan would hear her footsteps overhead. Last night? She'd listened for them because she'd made extra lasagna and thought she might offer Rebecca some, but she never heard the footsteps. That detail gave Sarah a chill. Mrs. Sullivan had essentially confirmed that Rebecca never made it home. Sarah spent the rest of Friday interviewing Rebecca's co-workers, her neighbors, her friends. Everyone painted the same picture. Rebecca was responsible, kind, had no enemies, wasn't seeing anyone seriously, had no drama in her life. She went to yoga class on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She volunteered at the animal shelter on Sunday afternoons. She had regular video calls with her sister Maria every Wednesday night. She was planning to visit Minneapolis for Maria's birthday in July. She had a dentist appointment scheduled for next week. These weren't the details of someone planning to disappear. The security footage from Nouveau Trends showed Rebecca leaving at 7:02 p.m., just as she'd said. After that, nothing. Sarah pulled footage from every camera on Main Street. She saw Rebecca walking north, passing Greta's coffee house, passing the hardware store. Then she entered the blind spot, that 2-minute stretch with no coverage, and never emerged on the other side. By Saturday morning, Maria had made the 3-hour drive from Minneapolis to Cedar Falls. She met with Detective Odom at the police station, brought recent photos of Rebecca, provided passwords for her social media accounts, authorized access to her phone records and bank accounts. Maria's hands shook as she signed the forms. "Where's my sister?" she kept asking. "Where is she?" Sarah didn't have an answer. But she mobilized everything she could. Chief Kowalski approved overtime for additional officers. They organized a search party for Saturday afternoon. Volunteers would spread out across Cedar Falls, checking parks, trails, anywhere Rebecca might be. More than 200 people showed up, the entire staff of Nouveau Trends, Rebecca's yoga class, people from the animal shelter, neighbors, even people who'd never met Rebecca but knew this wasn't normal, wasn't right, wanted to help. They divided into teams, covered every inch of accessible territory within the city limits. They walked the riverside trails, checked the wooded areas on the outskirts of town, looked in empty buildings and storage units. Nothing. No trace. Saturday night, Maria sat in Rebecca's apartment, surrounded by her sister's things, and tried not to fall apart. She looked at the photos on Rebecca's fridge, snapshots of them together, their parents who'd passed away years ago, Rebecca's friends, her cat Mr. Whiskers who died last year. A whole life documented in photographs. And somewhere, somehow, Rebecca had been pulled out of that life and vanished. Sunday morning brought a different kind of horror. Malcolm Hart had owned Hart's Home Goods for 30 years. The store sold furniture, home decor, kitchenware, the kind of place where you could buy anything from a couch to a coffee mug. It was a warehouse-style space with a large showroom floor and an even larger back storage area where inventory was kept before being moved to the sales floor. Malcolm arrived at 9 a.m. to open up. His wife, Linda, usually came in around 10 to help with the Sunday crowd. Malcolm unlocked the front door, disabled the alarm, went to his office to put his things down. Then he headed to the back storage room to check on a furniture delivery that was scheduled for Monday. He wanted to make sure they had space cleared. He pushed open the storage room door, flipped on the lights, and froze. The mannequins were the first thing he noticed. 4 of them, arranged in a semicircle in the center of the room. Malcolm didn't own mannequins. Hart's Home Goods didn't sell clothing. These didn't belong here. And their faces, painted with bright red lines in a grid pattern. Malcolm had seen the news stories about the mannequin thefts. These had to be some of them. But why were they in his storage room? How did they get here? Then his eyes adjusted to the full scene, and he saw what was in the center of that semicircle. At first, his brain couldn't process it. Another mannequin? No, that's not... Malcolm's scream brought his wife running from the parking lot. She'd just arrived, heard him through the open back door. When she reached the storage room and saw what Malcolm was looking at, she immediately pulled out her phone and called 911. Rebecca Chen was positioned on a circular display stand, the kind used for rotating product displays in furniture stores. Her body was rigid, held upright by the stand's central post. She was still wearing the blue cardigan, white blouse, and jeans from Thursday night. Her brown boots were still on her feet, but her face was painted with that same crimson grid pattern, precise horizontal and vertical lines, dividing her features into perfect squares. The paint was theatrical makeup, applied with professional care. Her eyes were closed. Her expression was neutral, peaceful almost, if you could look past the horror of what had been done to her. She'd been posed like the mannequins surrounding her. Arms at her sides, head tilted slightly forward. A living person, a woman with dreams and a family and a life, transformed into a display piece. Detective Odom arrived within 6 minutes of the 911 call. She'd been at the station, coordinating the ongoing search efforts when the call came through. The address meant nothing at first. Hart's Home Goods. What did that have to do with Rebecca Chen? Then dispatch clarified, body found. Female. Matches description of missing person. Sarah drove to the scene with her lights on, breaking every speed limit. She arrived before the ambulance, before the medical examiner, before anyone except the first patrol officers who were already securing the scene and keeping Malcolm and Linda Hart outside. She pulled on gloves, pulled on shoe covers, and entered the storage room. Even with 17 years in law enforcement, including 3 years with Milwaukee PD where she'd worked gang homicides and drug cases, Sarah wasn't prepared. She'd seen dead bodies before, she'd seen crime scenes, but this was something else entirely. The staging was meticulous, the mannequins arranged just so. Rebecca positioned at the exact center, the face painting done with artistic precision. This wasn't rage, this wasn't passion, this was calculated, deliberate, careful. This was someone treating a human being like an art project. Sarah documented everything with her phone camera before the scene could be disturbed. She noted the display stand. It belonged to Hart's, had been in this storage room. Someone had used what was available. She noted the mannequins, those stolen ones. Everyone had been looking for them. And here they were, part of this nightmare tableau. And she noticed something else, footprints in the dust. The storage room floor was concrete, dusty from inventory storage. There were footprints, men's boots, probably size 11 or 12, leading from the back door to the display area. Multiple sets of prints, overlapping. Someone had been here more than once. The medical examiner, Dr. Raymond Foster, arrived 20 minutes later. He was 63, had been Cedar Falls ME for 20 years, and this was the worst thing he'd ever seen in this town. He approached the body carefully, noted the rigor mortis, the lividity patterns, the condition of the skin. "She's been dead approximately 48 hours, he told Sarah quietly. "Sometime late Thursday night or early Friday morning. But she hasn't been here that long." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. Dr. Foster pointed to the lividity, the pooling of blood in the body after death that indicates position. The blood pooled in her back and legs, consistent with lying on her back. But she's standing up right now. She was moved post-mortem, probably within the last 12 to 24 hours. Which meant the killer had kept Rebecca's body somewhere else for at least a day, then brought her here to stage this scene. That took planning. That took control. That took a level of detachment that made Sarah's blood run cold. The state crime lab was called. This wasn't something Cedar Falls could handle alone. By afternoon, technicians in white suits were documenting everything, collecting evidence, taking measurements. Malcolm Hart was interviewed. He was still shaking, couldn't stop seeing what he'd found. No, he didn't know who could have gotten in. He had keys, his wife had keys, that was it. The locks hadn't been changed in 10 years. Could someone have made copies? Possible, he supposed, but who would? Then he remembered. About 6 months ago, he'd hired someone to do some work, build some custom display shelves, fix some lighting issues. A contractor. What was his name? Vincent something. Vincent Mercer. Sarah wrote that name down. The security footage from Hart's Home Goods became crucial evidence. Malcolm had installed cameras 6 months earlier after a burglary scare. Someone had tried to break in through the back door but hadn't succeeded. The cameras covered the back entrance, the loading dock, and had a partial view into the storage area. The footage was grainy, black and white, but clear enough. At 2:17 a.m. on Sunday morning, approximately 7 hours before Malcolm found Rebecca, a figure in dark clothing and a hood entered through the back door. They had a key. There was no fumbling with the lock, no forced entry. They went directly to the storage room, where Rebecca's body had already been positioned. For 11 minutes, the figure moved around the scene, adjusting things. From what investigators could tell, this person was perfecting the arrangement, making sure everything was exactly right. But when tech analysts went back further in the footage, they found something even more disturbing. Saturday night at 11:43 p.m., the same figure had entered. That visit lasted 8 minutes. The figure had stood in front of Rebecca's body, just standing there, looking. Then they'd adjusted her position on the display stand slightly. Then they'd stood back again, observing. Then they'd left. The killer was returning to admire their work, like an artist coming back to view a painting in different lighting, like a director checking a scene from different angles. Sarah watched that footage a dozen times, and each viewing made her feel sicker. The casual way the figure moved, the lack of urgency, the comfort level this person had with death, with dead bodies, with the horror they'd created. Chief Kowalski made the call to request assistance from the Wisconsin Department of Justice's Division of Criminal Investigation. They needed resources, expertise, and investigators who'd handled serial offenders before, because that's what everyone was thinking but not yet saying out loud. This person had done this before, or would do it again, or both. DCI Special Agent Marcus Holland arrived Monday morning with a team of 3 other agents, 2 forensic specialists, and a criminal analyst. Agent Holland was 46, had been with DCI for 12 years after 10 years with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. He'd worked cases involving sexual homicides, serial offenders, and staged crime scenes. He walked into the Hart's home goods storage room, which was still being processed, and immediately recognized the signature of a ritual killer. "This is someone with a compulsion," he told Sarah as they stood outside while Tex worked inside. "They're not killing out of rage or revenge, they're fulfilling a fantasy, a need. The staging, the painting, the positioning, this all means something to them, and here's the problem. When someone kills to fulfill a fantasy, and they successfully complete that fantasy, it reinforces the behavior. They'll do it again." The task force set up operations in a conference room at the Cedar Falls police station. Agent Holland took command, with Sarah as the local liaison. They started building a profile and investigating from multiple angles simultaneously. Rebecca's autopsy confirmed manual strangulation as cause of death. The killer had strangled her with their hands. The bruising pattern on her neck showed fingerprints, large hands, probably male, though not definitively. The grip had been from behind, one hand on each side of her neck, compressing the carotid arteries. Death would have occurred within 3 to 5 minutes. It was a method that required sustained pressure, physical strength, and being in close contact with the victim while they died. Toxicology revealed traces of ketamine in Rebecca's system. Ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. In the doses found, it would have left Rebecca conscious, but unable to move properly, unable to fight back. She would have been aware of what was happening, but physically incapable of defending herself. That detail haunted everyone who heard it. The face paint was analyzed. Professional theatrical makeup, specifically Maron Paradise paint in a shade called red. It's a water-activated paint commonly used in theater and special effects. You could buy it at any costume shop, any theatrical supply store, or online from dozens of retailers. Essentially untraceable. But the application technique showed skill. The lines were steady, precise, measured. Whoever painted Rebecca's face had experience with makeup application. They'd also done it while she was under the influence of ketamine, which meant she'd been breathing, possibly moving slightly, making the task more difficult. The killer had worked carefully, taking their time. The ligature marks on Rebecca's wrists and ankles told another part of the story. She'd been restrained with synthetic rope, probably nylon, soft enough not to cut the skin but strong enough to prevent escape. The pattern of the marks suggested she'd been restrained for several hours before death. Dr. Foster estimated she'd been held captive for 12 to 18 hours based on the timeline. Taken Thursday night, killed Friday morning, then kept until Sunday when she was staged. But where? Where had she been held? That became the critical question. The fibers found on Rebecca's clothing were collected and analyzed. Along with fibers from her own clothes, they found carpet fibers, beige, synthetic, common commercial grade. They found wood dust, sawdust, specifically from pine and oak. They found paint flecks, latex paint in various colors. And they found something unusual, tiny fragments of plastic in a peachy flesh tone. The lab identified them as polyvinyl chloride, PVC, the material mannequins are made from. Rebecca had been held somewhere with carpet, woodworking materials, paint supplies, and mannequins. The task force created a database of every location in Cedar Falls that fit that description. Furniture stores, home improvement stores, theaters, art studios, contractors' workshops. It was a long list. Meanwhile, they worked the victimology angle. Who was Rebecca? Who knew her? Who had access to her routine? They interviewed everyone at Nouveau Trends again. Julie Brennan, the assistant manager, provided detailed information about the store's operations, who came and went, who had worked there recently. About 8 months ago, Rebecca had hired a contractor to build some custom shelving units for the back storage area. The guy had done good work, been professional, finished on time. What was his name? Julie checked the records. Vincent Mercer. There was that name again. They interviewed Rebecca's friends, her yoga instructor, the volunteers at the animal shelter. Had anyone noticed anything unusual? Anyone paying too much attention to Rebecca? following her, making her uncomfortable? Most people said no. But one woman, Angela Torres, who took the same yoga class as Rebecca, remembered something. About 2 months ago, after class one evening, they'd walked out to the parking lot together. Angela noticed a van parked across the street, engine running, someone sitting in the driver's seat, just sitting there, watching them. Angela thought it was creepy and mentioned it to Rebecca. Rebecca had laughed it off, probably just someone waiting for their partner or looking at their phone. But Angela remembered feeling uneasy. Could Angela describe the van? Dark color, maybe blue or dark green, older model, no other details. They pulled vehicle registrations for Cedar Falls and surrounding counties. Vincent Mercer owned a 2009 Ford E150 van, dark blue. They interviewed the store owners who'd reported mannequin thefts. Every single one had hired Vincent Mercer for some kind of work at some point in the past year. Display building, repairs, painting, electrical work. He was a general contractor who specialized in retail spaces. He'd had access to all those stores. He'd known the layouts, the security systems, where the alarm panels were located. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Sarah and Agent Holland pulled Vincent Mercer's background. Age 37, originally from Chicago, moved to Wisconsin 4 years ago. Before Cedar Falls, he'd lived briefly in Milwaukee. He had no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. On paper, he was a regular guy trying to make a living in a small town. But they dug deeper. They contacted previous employers, people who'd known him in Milwaukee and Chicago, and they started hearing concerning things. A former roommate in Chicago described Vincent as odd, kept to himself, didn't have friends, spent a lot of time in his room doing art projects. The roommate had gone into Vincent's room once to borrow something and found it covered in sketches, drawings of human figures in various poses, anatomical studies, lots of work with proportions and geometry. An ex-girlfriend from Milwaukee, contacted by phone, remembered that Vincent was obsessed with perfection. Everything had to be just so. He'd gotten upset once when she moved a picture frame on his shelf, not angry upset, but disturbed, anxious. He'd immediately repositioned it, measured the distance from the wall with a ruler. She'd thought he maybe had OCD. They'd only dated 6 weeks before she ended it, feeling like he was more interested in arranging her than being with her. What did she mean by that? He'd pose her, she said, like for photos, but not really. He'd position her hands, tilt her head, move her hair, said he was finding her ideal form. It creeped her out. Then Agent Holland made the call to the Riverview Theater in Milwaukee. Vincent had worked there for 3 years before being terminated in October 2013. The managing director, Patricia Calloway, remembered the situation clearly. Vincent had been a talented set designer. His work was detailed, professional, creative, but over time, staff members reported uncomfortable interactions. Vincent would spend hours after everyone left, alone in the set workshop. The costume designer, arriving early one morning, found him in the costume shop with several mannequins arranged in a circle. He'd been painting their faces with stage makeup. When confronted, Vincent explained it as artistic exploration. He was experimenting with ways to make mannequins more expressive, more lifelike. Patricia had tried to be understanding. Artists could be eccentric. But other incidents followed. Vincent talking to the mannequins when he thought no one was listening. Vincent photographing them from different angles obsessively. Vincent becoming agitated when anyone moved or repositioned the mannequins without his permission. The final straw came when the theater's lead actress complained that Vincent made her uncomfortable during dress rehearsals. He'd stare at her with an intensity that felt wrong. He'd made comments about how she would look even more perfect if she could just hold still. The actress felt like he was mentally positioning her, arranging her in his mind. Patricia terminated Vincent's employment. She'd considered suggesting he seek mental health support, but there was no mechanism to force that, and honestly, she was just relieved to have him out of the theater. This was the kind of background information that transformed Vincent from person of interest to prime suspect. They now had established behavior, a fixation on mannequins, experience with theatrical makeup, a history of boundary violations involving posing and positioning, and a pattern that predated the Cedar Falls incidents by years. Judge Patricia Morrison granted a search warrant for Vincent Mercer's residence and property Tuesday evening, June 13th. The warrant was executed at 6 a.m. Wednesday morning. The tactical team, led by Agent Holland and including 6 other officers in full gear, approached the small house on Oakwood Lane quietly in the pre-dawn darkness. They breached the door at exactly 6 a.m. "Police! Search warrant!" Vincent Mercer was in bed, jolted awake by the sound of boots on his floor and shouting. He sat up, confused, scared. He didn't resist as 2 officers pulled him from bed, cuffed his hands behind his back, and read him his Miranda rights. He kept asking what was happening. What had he done? There must be some mistake. While officers secured Vincent and sat him in the living room under guard, the rest of the team began the search. The main floor was cluttered but not alarming. Art supplies everywhere. Paints, brushes, sketchbooks, canvases. The kitchen was messy, dishes piled in the sink. The bedroom was sparse. Mattress on the floor, clothes in plastic bins, more art supplies. The garage had been converted to a workshop. Tools everywhere. Power saws, drills, sanders. Wood pieces in various stages of being crafted into furniture or displays. Paint cans, stain, varnish. Drop cloths covered in paint splatters. This was clearly where Vincent did his contractor work. But it was Detective Sarah Odom who found the entrance to the basement. It wasn't accessible from inside the house. There was no interior stairway. Around the back of the property, almost hidden by overgrown shrubs, was a bulkhead entrance, the kind of slanted door set into the ground that led to underground storage. "Over here," Sarah called out. The bulkhead door was secured with a heavy padlock. They cut it off with bolt cutters. Sarah pulled open the door, revealing concrete steps leading down into darkness. She clicked on her flashlight and descended carefully, weapon drawn. Other officers followed. At the bottom of the stairs, she found a light switch. She flipped it on. And there it was, the place nightmares are made of. The basement was roughly 600 square feet, concrete walls, concrete floor, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling providing dim light. It was cool down there, maybe 55 degrees. There were no windows. The only entrance was through that bulkhead. Mannequins filled the space, not scattered randomly, but arranged deliberately. Dozens of them. Some standing in groups, facing each other as if in conversation. Others positioned individually throughout the room. Some seated on chairs, some standing against walls. And every single one had their face painted with various designs, some with the now infamous crimson grid pattern, others with different geometric designs, experimental patterns, test runs. Sarah stood at the bottom of those stairs and felt ice run through her veins. This was a workshop of horror, a gallery of the disturbed. Agent Holland came down behind her, and she heard him exhale slowly. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. They documented everything, photographed from every angle, called in additional forensic techs to process the scene because this was going to take hours, maybe days. The mannequins themselves told a story. Some were clearly the ones reported stolen from Cedar Falls stores, specific clothing, specific damage that matched reports. Others were older, probably acquired before Vincent moved to the area. The face paintings showed evolution. Early ones were crude, messy. As you looked at the more recent ones, the technique improved. Lines got steadier, patterns got more precise. He'd been practicing, refining his skill over years. One wall was covered with sketches and photographs, detailed diagrams showing facial anatomy, measurements, proportions, drawings of grid patterns overlaid on face outlines, photos of mannequins in different poses, different lighting setups, and then, more disturbing, photos of people. Candid shots, surveillance style, people on the street, people in stores, people who had no idea they were being watched and documented. Rebecca Chen was among them. Multiple photos of Rebecca coming out of Nouveau Trends, walking to her apartment, sitting in the window at Greta's coffee house. Vincent had been watching her for months. There was a workbench along one wall covered with theatrical makeup supplies, dozens of colors, brushes of various sizes, mixing palettes, instruction books about stage makeup, special effects makeup, theatrical design, a ring light on a stand for proper lighting. This was a professional setup. And there were the journals. 3 spiral-bound notebooks stacked on a small table. Agent Holland pulled on gloves and carefully opened the first one. It was dated from 2012, 5 years ago. The entries started almost philosophical. Vincent wrote about beauty, stillness, perfection. He wrote about how mannequins represented the ideal form, human but without human flaws. They didn't age, didn't change, didn't resist. They existed in perfect stillness. A mannequin is art that breathes space, one early entry read. It occupies physical reality without the chaos of life. It's beautiful because it's controlled. Perfection through pose. As the entries progressed, they became darker. Vincent wrote about wanting to create living stillness. He became obsessed with the idea of transformation, taking something imperfect and making it perfect. He developed theories about geometry and the human face, about how grid patterns revealed underlying mathematical perfection. Then the entries shifted to specifics. In 2013, around the time he was fired from the Riverview Theater, he wrote about his first attempts to elevate human form. The language was cryptic but disturbing. He described finding subjects who approached perfection and wanting to complete their transformation. The most recent journal, started in early 2017, was explicit. He wrote about Cedar Falls, about finding the perfect community to continue his work. He wrote about the mannequin thefts as practice preparation. I must perfect the ritual before attempting the sacred work, one entry read. Each mannequin teaches me. The paint must flow steadily. The lines must be precise. The geometry must be perfect. Then came entries about Rebecca. He referred to her as Subject 1 initially, but later entries used her name. He'd been watching her since January. He documented her routine, her schedule, her habits. He wrote about how she moved, how she held herself, how her face had ideal proportions for the grid. One entry from late May read, Rebecca understands beauty. I see it in how she arranges the store displays. But she doesn't understand transcendence. She doesn't see that true beauty requires stillness, requires the transformation from chaotic life to perfect form. Soon I will teach her. Soon she will be part of the work. The entry from June 9th, the day after Rebecca was taken, was chilling. The first transformation is complete. Subject 1 accepted the sacred paint with grace. The ketamine provided the necessary stillness during the ritual. The final transition happened at 3:47 a.m., the exact moment when darkness gives way to approaching dawn, when one state transforms to another. Perfect timing, perfect execution. She is now eternal, perfect, complete. Tomorrow I will display her in the gallery space. Others must see the work. But there were more names in those journals. Potential subjects Vincent had been watching. Sarah felt sick reading them. 3 other women in Cedar Falls, all working in retail, all fitting a certain physical profile. He'd been planning to continue. Forensic evidence tied everything together. Carpet fibers from the basement matched fibers found on Rebecca's clothing. Wood dust from Vincent's workshop matched dust found on her shoes. Most damning, trace DNA evidence. Blood had been found on one of the work tables. Small amounts, but enough to test. It was Rebecca's blood. The display stand that Rebecca had been positioned on at Hart's Home Goods wasn't the original location. Vincent had posed her here first, in his basement, on a different stand that was still present. He'd arranged her, photographed her, documented his work, then he'd transported her to Hart's for the public display. Investigators found carpet fibers in Vincent's van that matched both his basement and the storage room at Hart's. They found Rebecca's DNA in the van, on the seat, on the floor mat. They found trace evidence of the theatrical makeup in the van's cargo area. And they found his phone. Vincent had been careful about a lot of things, but he'd made a critical mistake. His phone automatically backed up photos to the cloud. He'd deleted the photos from his device, But cloud backups persist unless specifically removed, and Vincent apparently didn't know that. Tech forensics recovered everything. Photos of Rebecca unconscious in the basement, wrists and ankles bound. Photos of him applying the ketamine, a syringe visible, Rebecca's eyes unfocused. Photos of the strangulation itself, taken on a timer, showing Vincent positioned behind Rebecca. Photos of him applying the face paint with careful precision while she was already dead. Photos of the completed transformation. Rebecca posed, painted, arranged with the other mannequins, and more photos, the ones that showed his depravity completely. Vincent had attended Rebecca's memorial service on June 12th before his arrest. He'd stood in the back of the crowd with his phone, taking photos of Maria Chen crying, of Rebecca's friends embracing, of the community mourning. He'd documented their grief like it was part of his art project. Agent Holland conducted the interrogation Wednesday afternoon after all the evidence had been collected. Vincent had been in custody for 8 hours, sitting in a cell, probably realizing how much they'd found. Holland read Vincent his rights again. Vincent waived his right to an attorney, a catastrophic decision his court-appointed lawyer would later call legal suicide. Holland laid out the evidence piece by piece, the journals, the photos, the DNA, the forensics, everything. Vincent sat quietly through most of it. Then, when Holland finished, Vincent looked up and said, "You don't understand what I was doing." "Then help me understand," Holland said, and Vincent talked. For 3 hours, he explained his philosophy. He talked about mannequins as the bridge between human imperfection and artistic perfection. He talked about the grid pattern as sacred geometry that revealed the mathematical beauty underlying physical form. He talked about how death was just another transformation, no different than a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, and how his subjects were elevated through his work. He didn't deny killing Rebecca. Instead, he reframed it. "I didn't kill her," he said. "I transformed her. I gave her permanence. She was beautiful when alive, but constrained by time, by aging, by change. Now she's eternal, the perfect form, frozen in the perfect moment." Holland let him talk because sometimes the best interrogation technique is just giving someone rope and letting them hang themselves with their own words. Then Holland asked about the other names in the journal. Was Vincent planning to kill them too? Vincent hesitated. Then, "I was planning to continue the work, yes. There were others who had potential, who could be elevated." Elevated meaning killed and posed like mannequins? Elevated meaning transformed into art, into perfection. Holland pushed on a different angle. "You kept going back to Hart's Home Goods. You returned to Rebecca's body twice after you placed her there. Why?" Vincent's eyes lit up. This was something he wanted to talk about. The display wasn't quite right initially. The angle of her head was 3 degrees off. The positioning of her hands needed adjustment. I couldn't leave it imperfect. The work had to be exactly right. "And the photos you took at her memorial service?" Vincent shifted uncomfortably for the first time. "I wanted to document the impact of the work, to see how people responded." "Her sister was crying in those photos. Her friends were devastated. That was the impact you wanted to document?" Vincent didn't answer that. Holland moved to the critical question. "Were there others before Rebecca? Other victims?" Vincent went quiet. He stared at his hands for a long moment. Then he said, "I want a lawyer now." Too late. He'd already confessed to Rebecca's murder and to planning additional murders. But that silence, that refusal to answer about previous victims, told Holland what he needed to know. There were others. The task force went back through unsolved cases, missing persons, unexplained deaths. They focused on Milwaukee and Chicago, where Vincent had lived previously. They found Stephanie Torres. She'd disappeared from downtown Cedar Falls in March 2016, over a year before Rebecca. The case had gone cold. Stephanie had worked at Chic Street, a boutique where Vincent had done renovation work. The timing matched Vincent's journal entries about early experiments. Cadaver dogs were brought to Vincent's property. They indicated on an area of woods about 200 yards behind his house, beyond the property line on state forest land. The excavation team dug carefully. They found Stephanie Torres buried in a shallow grave 3 feet down. She'd been there over a year. The body was badly decomposed, but dental records confirmed identity. Cause of death, strangulation, same method as Rebecca. Traces of theatrical makeup were found in soil samples adhering to the skull. She'd been painted too, but then buried rather than displayed. Vincent's earlier work before he'd perfected his ritual. Then there was Marcus Holloway, the 26-year-old sales associate who disappeared in August 2016. His body had been found 2 weeks later by hikers in a wooded area 15 miles outside Cedar Falls. At the time, investigators had noted traces of makeup on his face, but couldn't make sense of it. Rain had washed most of it away. Now, with Vincent in custody, they reviewed that case file. Marcus had lived 3 blocks from Vincent's house. The ligature marks on Marcus's neck matched the pattern consistent with Vincent's large hands. Soil from the discovery location matched soil from Vincent's property. Vincent had killed Marcus in his basement, kept the body for a day or two while he worked on it, then dumped it when he realized his technique wasn't yet perfected. 3 victims confirmed. Possibly more they hadn't found yet. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit got involved to examine whether Vincent might be connected to unsolved cases in Illinois, where he'd lived before coming to Wisconsin. Vincent Mercer was officially charged on June 16, 2017, with 3 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, 2 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of hiding a corpse, 18 counts of burglary, 1 count of abuse of a corpse, and multiple other charges. Wisconsin doesn't have the death penalty, so the maximum sentence available was life without parole. The evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution, led by Assistant Attorney General David Park, had physical evidence, DNA, photographs, journal entries, a partial confession, and expert testimony. The defense had almost nothing to work with. Vincent Mercer was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole on April 12, 2018, after a 7-week trial. The charges included 3 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, 2 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of hiding a corpse, 18 counts of burglary, and 1 count of abuse of a corpse. He's currently housed at Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, where he remains in protective custody after being attacked twice by other inmates. He's never expressed remorse, still writing letters about his artistic vision to this day. The families have tried to rebuild their lives. Maria Chen established the Rebecca Chen Foundation in 2019, which has helped over 50 families dealing with missing loved ones. Diana Torres moved away from Cedar Falls, unable to bear living in the town where her daughter died. Marcus Holloway's girlfriend, Jennifer Wright, required extensive therapy for PTSD and has spoken about the randomness of his death. He died simply because he existed in the same town as a monster. Cedar Falls itself has changed forever. The town's innocence is gone, replaced by locked doors and heightened awareness that evil can live anywhere. Nouveau Trends was eventually transformed into a bookshop called Chapter 2, with a memorial plaque reading, "In memory of Rebecca Chen, whose light and kindness made this street brighter, 1988 to 2017. The courtroom evidence photo, Exhibit 47B, remains sealed, too disturbing for public release, but those who've seen it say the image never leaves them. Rebecca Chen, Stephanie Torres, and Marcus Holloway deserve the lives that were stolen from them, the futures they'd never see, the love they'd never experience, the contributions they'd never make to the world. Rebecca would be 35 now. Stephanie would be 30. Marcus would be 32. We remember them not as victims in Vincent Mercer's twisted fantasy, but as the human beings they were, flawed, beautiful, real people who loved and were loved, who mattered, who deserved to grow old and live full lives. This is their story, their names, their memories, and we make sure they're never forgotten,